Hello, my name is Dorian Gadaveo. For me, the most interesting thing that I've learned while taking this course comes from our very first chapter regarding the history of juvenile justice. This chapter goes over a bit of the history of juvenile justice and how it essentially started some 4,000 years ago with the Code of Harambe, which talks about there being a distinction between youthful and adult offenders, similar to what we've come to know in present times. The chapter then goes on to illustrate different time periods and different civilizations where present juvenile justice began to form, such as 2,000 years ago with Rome's civil law and canon church law. I personally feel Roman civil law is a great example of juvenile justice beginning, as Rome was a major civilization that shaped the world we live in today. A part of their civil law was the understanding that children were still criminally responsible for breaking the law and were still to be punished by their criminal justice system. However, unlike adult violators, juvenile offenders received less severe punishment for the same crime. For example, if someone stole crops, it was considered a capital offense, punishable by death. But only for adults. Those under the age of puberty were to be flogged only. Similarly, theft itself was punishable with flogging and enslavement to the victims. But children only received corporal punishment and were required to make restitutions. The difference in punishment is similar to how we deal with juvenile offenders today, although without the use of corporal punishment and more so focused on rehabilitation. The reason I find the history of juvenile justice so interesting is because it has so many similarities and differences to how juvenile justice is done today. It also shows how far we've come as a society, and even thousands of years ago we understood that children were different and needed to be treated differently than adults. While we may have had a couple setbacks in more recent times, such as early 1825, when children were generally subjected to same penalties as adults and even shared the same cells in jail or prison, we eventually worked our way back to separating juvenile and adult punishment, which has become what we know today. What has surprised me most about the juvenile justice system is that it deals with juveniles in a more rehabilitative way rather than punishment in a reduced way. When I began the course, I thought juvenile justice punished juveniles, but with reduced forms of sentences that would be given to adults for the same crime. But I was surprised to find out that it actually doesn't utilize punishment as much as it does rehabilitative measures. Juvenile justice focuses on things like counseling, education, and probation over incarceration for juveniles, which is not the case for adult offenders, which I personally feel is a shame, as some adults would benefit more from rehabilitation than simply being punished usually through jail or prison time. Although the way juveniles are handled differently from adults was surprising, for example, when it comes to jury trials, juveniles don't have the right to one, even though it's a constitutional right. That would be because in 1971 it was decided that juveniles had no right to a jury trial because the proceedings had yet to become a criminal prosecution. I find the different way juveniles are handled compared to adults surprising because it showcases an entirely different justice system for those under a certain age, that being 18. The fact that certain constitutional rights don't apply to juveniles is a surprising truth, as our country is essentially built on the Constitution, which applies to any and all people within the U.S. My definition of juvenile justice was originally that it's a separate justice system designed specifically for those of young age who have not yet fully developed mentally or physically. While I still hold that definition to be true, I would amend it to a separate system which handles any case involving minors. Cases involving juveniles who commit delinquent acts, status offenses, or just require court intervention for their safety. Not just simply juveniles that break the law, as I originally would have defined the justice system.